Hi, and welcome to Open, the show that opens the Bronx and the rest of the world to you. I'm Kibin Alleyne, and today we'll update you on what's happening in and around our borough. Coming up, the Autism and Grief Project is on a mission to help autistic adults cope with the challenges of life, offering a range of helpful resources targeting life-changing events. A board member from the Autism and Grief Project joins us to discuss the effort. Then, through its neighborhood council, the High Line awarded a grant to 3 local organizations working to support new migrants in New York City. Senior Director for Community Government Relations at the High Line and grant recipient UnLocal tells us more later on. After that, we take a look at a special interview with the Executive Director of the Better Business Bureau to discuss common scams and how to avoid them. And finally, Las Borinqueñas is a play that highlights the lives of 5 Puerto Rican women and their struggle for freedom during an era with strict gender roles and changing reproductive rights. The playwright joins me in studio to explore the themes of the play. So stay tuned, all this and much more is headed your way because we're now officially open. Hello everyone, I'm Kibin Alleyne and today is Tuesday, April 2nd. You're now watching Open, a program that brings the Bronx and New York City straight to you. Don't forget to stay connected with us via social media at BronxNet TV. April is Autism Awareness Month, and to support autistic adults, the Autism and Grief Project offers an online platform to help them cope with the complexities of grief and loss. This platform provides resources to navigate the challenges of losing a loved one as well as non-death losses. Advisory board member for the Autism and Grief Project and the Senior Vice President of Grief Programs at Hospice Foundation of America, Dr. Kenneth J. Doka, joins me to discuss the effort. Doctor, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you for having us. Thank you.
Now, the Autism and Grief Project launched in 2022. Can you tell me more about what sparked the inspiration to create this organization?
Sure. The basic reason was that there are a lot of resources for children on the autism spectrum about grief, but almost none, actually none that I'm aware of for adults. So the Hospice Foundation really, the Autism and Grief Project was launched in September of 2002 by the Hospice Foundation of America with a grant from the NLM Family Foundation. And what it tries to do really is it's a virtual toolkit. It's a one-of-a-kind platform with a mission to help adults without autism navigate and cope with the complexities of grief, and that arises from the loss of a person or a non-death loss. And we offer all kinds of resources to family, to the person with autism, to professionals. We offer firsthand accounts of grief, what we call social stories, videos, links to provide support. It's a real toolkit for people involved in loss and grief, and those trying to help persons with autism.
Now, I would love to explore, what are some ways that grief affects those with autism different from those who are considered neurotypical?
Okay. Well, I think you have to realize we're talking about 2 spectrums. Grief is a spectrum, and there's no single way that people respond to grief. Grief affects us on many, many levels: physically, emotionally, cognitively, spiritually, behaviorally. And then, of course, autism is a spectrum, where some people on the spectrum are very high functioning, and others might not even realize or recognize that they struggle with autism, to others who are nonverbal. So, so it's a wide project, and I think often people with autism may have difficulties expressing their behaviors and expressing their grief in particular ways, and so the project really tries to validate those different responses to grief and respond to people who are really struggling with grief. Others may see their responses as inappropriate, incongruent, or indifferent, and that might limit their support. For example, I once interviewed a young adult who had lost her father. She was very, very close to her dad. But whenever she was nervous, whenever she was grieving, she had this kind of nervous giggle. So she would, say, my dad died," and to other people, it just came off as very, very strange. But that was her way of expressing her nervousness.
I'm so glad that you pointed that out because it further just makes it known that everybody deals with grief differently. And so I appreciate you for pointing that out. How does your organization ensure that they support each individual based on their specific needs? And, what are some ways that we as a society can just be a little bit more aware of that?
Well, one is to go on our website. That might help, griefandautism.org. But I think, loss is really very much a part of life. And as I said, people respond differently. And what we try to do here is by offering a whole host of different resources, some verbal, some nonverbal, and we offer them. We have three tracks really in the program on the site. One is for people with autism, one is for their family members, and one is for professionals. And people can navigate through any of those three. So it really is a kind of valuable resource, and really seeks to help people with autism understand, validate their own responses, but also helps those with it who are working with people with autism, whether as a family member or professional, to have a greater understanding.
Now, one of the organization's guiding principles is diversity and inclusion. How does your organization prioritize diversity?
Well, first of all, we understand that in grief in general, in hospice care, there has been a disparity where Black and brown populations have not always made as much use of these facilities, may not be aware of them. And also because much of the early research was prioritized to support white children and with autism. And as a result, Black and brown children have often been misdiagnosed or not diagnosed at all until they reach adulthood. And so there aren't as many services for them. But I think what we have really tried to do is to be inclusive as possible. There's been a tremendous effort in raising awareness about autism in these communities and bridging gaps in resources. So we're really trying to make this more available to people, and more open and more inclusive.
Now, can you talk a little bit more about the history of this? Because I think it's very interesting that, as you mentioned, for a very long time, a lot of Black and Latino or Black and brown children were either misdiagnosed or just not diagnosed at all. What effect did this have on the community of people who did have autism within these communities?
Yeah, and unfortunately, the effect was negative because they weren't getting the resources that they needed to maximize their ability to interact. So it was really important that I think a project really focused, that was open to diversity, that was open to inclusion, that was open to empowerment, and that would allow people with autism to get personal support, but also to help people who were dealing with them both professionally and in the family to also provide resources for them. I think it was an incredibly important project. I was very proud to be part of it.
Now, how can a lack of resources, and I think for those who may not work in this community, they may not be aware of what those resources may look like, but how can a lack of resources affect those who live with autism, but also, caregivers and friends and people who support those with autism?
Well, as I said, we're dealing with a spectrum. So I think the first thing we need to do is to understand that spectrum. And if there's not information out, if there's not information that's accessible, obviously that's going to complicate the situation somewhat. So again, what we tried to do was to really provide you might say, one-stop shopping, where people who have any relationship to the autism community, whether it's a professional caregiver, a clergy person, for example. Clergy can be critically important here in helping people identify and helping them find resources. People who would never think of going to a psychiatrist or a psychologist would be, maybe very, very open to just talking with their local priest or pastor or minister or rabbi or imam, whatever that person is. So again, we wanted to provide resources to all those involved in the community, to all those involved in care.
Now, I also want to take a moment to highlight this, which I was very happy to see. There's also an information portal dedicated to friends and family of autistic adults, because I believe that it truly is a community effort. And, the saying that it takes a village, I think this kind of like proves that, correct. So can you talk a little bit more about the importance of having that feature?
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important features we have. There, professionals often find information. As I said, there are services for people with autism, but it's really important to recognize that people with autism, like anybody else, all of us, are encased in communities, are encased in what I call intimate networks. And you want to get information out to those networks, so those networks can really provide support. And so I think this I think is to me, one of my favorite features, is that it really does speak directly to three very distinct populations in ways that doesn't create silos, but creates the exchange of information across these three groups.
And I also want to highlight, which was also extremely important as well, that there was something there for caregivers. And
Yeah.
there was a focus on, self-care tips, which is so important. Can you talk a little bit more about, that addition to the website?
Yeah. As I said, we have three tracks on the website, but they're not exclusive. You can go between one and the other. One is professional caregivers, one is family caregivers, and one, of course, is persons with autism. And and of course, when you're dealing with someone with autism, it can add stress, especially if they're uh, on the lower end of the spectrum, so to speak, where they require much more care, and much more support. And so it's important to talk about self-care too. You know, um, I think we get a lesson whenever we go on a plane. We get a lesson on self-care, and it's an important lesson. And the lesson is that when they're giving the opening announcement, they say, if oxygen comes out and you're sitting with a child, put your mask on first, and then help the child. And it really reminds us, unless we take good care of ourselves, it becomes much harder to care for other people. So we've got to learn from our airplane experiences to put the mask on ourselves and take care of ourselves if we're going to help others. And again, for caregivers, that's sometimes tough because we don't like to admit our own vulnerability.
Right. Now, I appreciate you for taking the time to explain this, and I think that the organization is doing amazing work. I know early in the interview you mentioned that you're so proud to be a part of this. Can you just talk a little bit more about your experience just being a part of this, this project and kind of helping this community?
Um, well, I think it's important to remember that I've been involved in the Hospice Foundation for probably over 30 years as a consultant and now as senior vice president and part of this project. And one of the things that I've really enjoyed about the Hospice Foundation is that it has really pioneered access to hospice by groups that are often um, not considered, and services to grieving people from those groups. So a number of years ago, we did some extensive work, Hospice Foundation of America, in working with families with persons with intellectual disabilities. And it's part of a broad outreach that we've always had. We've always tried to be as inclusive as possible and to reach out to populations um, who may not be getting the best mainstream services, maybe because of class differences, ethnic differences, neurological differences. So as an organization, we're pledged to inclusivity.
Well, Doctor, I want to thank you so much for joining us and, really sharing this very valuable information with our community. So thank you again.
Yeah, and again, anybody who wants to see the material, it's autismandgrief.org.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much for inviting me.
Once again, to learn more about the work of the Autism and Grief Project, visit their website at autismandgrief.org. Don't go away. We'll be back with more Open after this.
I remember when the Bronx did not really have a media outlet properly representing the people of the Bronx.
BronxNet provides for the community by being a community where people can be empowered to share their voices.
We are in a really great place technologically. We've got all the resources that we need to be effective.
Whether it's through cameras, storytelling, editing, we have provided those services for 30 years.
BronxNet's mission is to be a voice for the community.
To educate, to inform, and to inspire.
And you can be a part of it. We've built studios for you.
Welcome back. The Highline announced 3 local recipients of a $25,000 grant in an effort to address the migrant crisis in New York City. These recipients were selected through its Neighbors Council, a community body that collaborates with nonprofits. PS11, Quest to Learn, and UnLocal are the 3 recipients of the grant. Senior Director for Community Government Relations at the Highline, Preeti Sodhi, and Director of Community Programs Engagements at UnLocal, Eva Mayhabal Davis, joins me to discuss the mission. Thank you both so much for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for the invitation.
Of course. So I'd just like to know, first, what inspired the Highline to create a grant aimed at supporting new migrants in New York?
Well, the Highline, it's a park on the west side of Manhattan, but we're also much more than that. We're a nonprofit organization in a community space, given that we're constantly thinking about how can we be a good neighbor. One of the ways we do this is to ensure that our community has a seat at the table, and we do that through our Community Advisory Council, the Neighbors Council. It's an intergenerational group. We have teenagers. Our oldest member is 88. And it's one way where we tap into listening to what is happening on to our community on the ground. We collaborate with our Neighbors Council to get input. We help to shape programs. And one of these programs is the Neighbor to Neighbor Fund, which just completed its 3rd year. In conversations with our Neighbors Council last year, we talked about issues impacting our community. And one of the issues that kept coming up was the fact that we had many newly arrived migrant families to our community, and then there was an impact on the community-based organizations on the ground that were working to support them.
Now, as I mentioned, 3 different recipients were awarded a total of $25,000, which is pretty amazing. What were some of the qualities Highline looked for when awarding the grants?
So some of the qualities that the Highline looked for when awarding these grants were, who are the organizations that have deep roots in our community, that have trust-based relationships, and where could the funding make the biggest impact? One of the priorities that has come up time and time again for our Neighbors Council is supporting children and young people, so that was another thing that we were looking at. Some of the grantees had pre-existing relationships with, like the schools. Some are new, like UnLocal. An added bonus that came through all of this was that each organization expressed a real desire to get to know each other and work together. And so for us, that felt that really could, maximize and amplify the impact of the grant.
Now, Eva, I want to say congratulations first, because your organization, UnLocal, is among those who received the grant. Can you just tell me a little bit more about your organization?
Absolutely. UnLocal is a community-centered organization that works to provide legal representation as well as community education for New York's undocumented community.
Now, I also want to mention that a lot of the work that your organization has been doing has been for years, since 2008. How has the work the organization does evolved since 2008 till now, especially as, New York City is experiencing a migrant crisis?
It has evolved and grown so much. From the very beginning of it being a very personal mission from our founder, to it being embedded into the communities. And now we're based in Manhattan as a center point where we can have immigrant families reach us from all boroughs. And at the moment, really responding and listening to what our community needs.
Now, I would also appreciate if you could just give us a little bit of background about the migrant crisis in New York City. I know that for a lot of New Yorkers, people just may hear things in passing, or like maybe they'll see a clip on the news, and sometimes the stories could be swayed either way. But I think it's really important that now that we have somebody who's been doing the work, if you can give us just a background of what's actually going on.
Sure, I think it's important for us to remember the background of what New York City is, and that what this country is too, that it is part of an immigrant community, that we are that community. And it isn't so much around a crisis, but it is very much about what our role has been with every new wave of migrants into the country and into the city. Where have we stepped up to be a new neighbor? Where have we stepped up to support our communities? And also, what are the ways in which we want to present ourselves as a welcoming community, as a sanctuary city, and also what it means to think about the wealth in this city and its distribution for our new neighbors, for ourselves, and prompting up generation after generation of immigrants.
Now, Preeti, New York City has seen, as we mentioned, a significant influx of immigrants in recent years. Mm-hmm. Why was it important for the High Line to address this? I know that sometimes we see organizations and people think that they just do their thing in their own little corner. But I think it's very interesting that your organization decided to step up. So can you explain why that was important?
Sure. So first of all, the High Line, it's a park for all New Yorkers. All are welcome. And we really want all of our visitors to feel a sense of belonging. As you talked about, our city has welcomed thousands of newcomers, and in our own backyard, we have many families who are staying in temporary housing and shelters and enrolling in public schools in our community, such as PS 11 and Quest to Learn, and needing assistance from community organizations like UnLocal.
Now, before we talk about the other organizations, because would love to, learn a little bit more about them, can you both just explain, so far leading up to this point, what has this just, your natural feeling, what has this been, this experience been like for the both of you, just being a part of this?
Well, at the moment, I think it's really listening to the community. It means of understanding what we've been missing, and I think this also goes back to the way that New York City has dealt with anything it faces. At one point, it was COVID, and in the before times, all of these different crises per se. And here we are again, trying to find a creative solution, trying to find a collaborative solution with partners. So it's really an honor to be able to consider what a public space is and really own it and be part of a grantee with the High Line.
I think it just gets back to, being a good neighbor and, listening to your community. I think, one of the things I mentioned, one of the most inspiring parts of all of this is connecting these three organizations together, Quest to Learn, PS 11 Aid Foundation, and UnLocal. There's been so much, first they were so appreciative and they're doing such important work in our community, but also there's such excitement about connecting with each other. So that was really special that we were able to support them, but also connect them with each other, and hopefully, that has impact on their work down the road.
Now, I also want to take a moment to highlight PS 11 and Quest to Learn. Although they're not here, I can imagine they're probably just as amazing as UnLocal. Can you tell us a little bit more about those organizations and why they were selected?
Sure. So Quest to Learn and PS 11 are trusted organizations and places of learning in our community. At PS 11, this was actually the Aid Foundation came out of a group of families that were mobilized during the pandemic. And when these newly arrived migrant families came to our community and started enrolling in the school, they reinvigorated the network to come together to support them. Everything from providing basic needs to having a free store to provide so that migrant families could access what they needed. At Quest to Learn, for example, they really amplified their language services to accommodate students and further developed other programs and initiatives to serve them, as well as making sure they had access to their basic necessities. You know, these schools, they embraced their students, they were responsive, they embraced their families, and you know, it was really important for us to support them. We've had longstanding relationships with both. With UnLocal, they're an organization that we are newly connected with, and we're looking to further develop that relationship.
All right, thank you so much for just like giving us a little bit of background on that. Now, Eva, how will the grant money further support your organization's effort to support immigrants in New York? And you know, you don't have to give like all the specific details, but you know, what are some plans that you have now that you've won this grant?
Absolutely. We actually have a lot of programming that we've established with UnLocal. Programming especially geared towards our youth, our undocumented youth, as well as really programs for the summer that bring community together and in those expressions of joy. And also in order to support the ongoing staff and essential workers that continue to do this work. And what we have planned for the summer is a continued collaboration with our partners. We have an open community closet where we're always looking for donations and have wish lists for the essential items that we know our clients need. And of course, we have a resource fair coming up and really providing resources of connecting to other social services and our partners and collaborators.
And I also want to take a moment. I know that I mentioned that it began in 2008. I'm curious to know, how did your organization kind of push through, still going strong even after the pandemic?
I think it really comes down to working with individuals that are part of the community, that we see and understand what the needs are. And I think it also comes out of a place of care, of a lot of care. And really also thinking through what are creative ways to find solutions to being able to live and find sustainability.
Now, Preeti, can you just explain, how do you hope your organization will continue to assist New Yorkers in need? I think this was an amazing initiative. You know, what are some plans for the future?
Well, you know, first and foremost, the Highline, it's a place of belonging. We hope that people come, they hang out with their friends and family, they get respite, they experience our horticulture, our public art program. You know, we have free public programs all throughout the year, cultural programs. We also have our teen employment program, our volunteer program. So it's really coming to visit, taking advantage of everything we have to offer, but also knowing that, you know, we're going to continue actively listening to our neighbors and our community members. We want to know what's happening in our community. We want to know how we can support them. That's something that we're going to continue to do.
Well, I want to thank you both so much for joining us and just giving us a little bit of background about both of the communities that you guys helped create. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To stay up to date with the community at the Highline, visit thehighline.org. And to learn more about the UnLocal and the resources they provide, visit their website at unlocal.org. Stay tuned. We have more open for you right after this. All right, thank you both so much.
So BronxNet is a great place for anyone to come to if you're looking to learn how to get yourself in the door, how to get your toes wet, if you will, when it comes to media, when it comes to editing. And I would definitely recommend it to anyone who really is interested in, you know, learning how to work, you know, whether it's in studio production, whether it's field production, whether it's learning how to operate a camera, whether it's learning how to interview and host. This is the place for you to be. This is the place for you to sort of get your feet wet and be amongst other creatives here in the Bronx who are also trying to learn and develop their own content.
30 years of BronxNet, 4 years of modern noticing. Broadcasting stories that may inspire you, untold or underreported stories. BronxNet, your story is heard. Thank you for your support. Thank you for watching Modern Odyssey on BronxNet.
Welcome back. For this segment, we'll view a special interview with Brian Rauer, Executive Director of Better Business Bureau serving New York, to discuss common scams and how to avoid them. Let's take a look. Achieving financial freedom and security can be a challenge for many Americans. As a result, some people turn to credit repair or debt relief services. However, trusting the wrong person with your sensitive financial information could lead to more problems and stress. Executive Director for the Better Business Bureau serving Metropolitan New York, Brian Rauer, now joins me to discuss and share some helpful advice on avoiding untrustworthy businesses. Brian, thank you so much for joining me.
Very welcome. Glad to be here.
Now, can you just talk about, why are credit repair and debt relief services such an easy area to scam others? And, what makes these people struggling with debt relief or, struggling with debt in general more vulnerable to these types of scams?
Well, I think you said it yourself. They're in a vulnerable position. I think people who are already behind in their payments, who are facing loss of their home, loss of their car, loss of their financial freedom, they're already in a very susceptible state. Some of them can be desperate. They could have a lien on their home, whatever the case may be. They're looking for any kind of a lifeline to get themselves out of this position. So the scammers are preying on the fact that these people could be in a desperate situation, and they want to trust, they want to believe that there's a quick fix. They want to believe they're over promises, and they want to believe that someone can help get them out of this very quickly. So that's the reason why when we see a lot of these reports to scam, BBB scam tracker, things like that, a very high percentage of the people that are approached by this actually end up losing money to scams like this because they're so susceptible to this.
Now, how do people know which credit repair companies to trust if they are in financial trouble?
You can't always be 100% sure, but you want to at least go through the steps of checking legitimacy. So when you're looking at a company, you want to be very wary of someone that overpromises. So if they promise, for example, if it's a credit repair company, they say, I will guarantee you a 750 or an 800 credit score. We guarantee it. They have almost no information about you. They guarantee they will remove all negative marks on your credit rating, on your credit report. No one can promise that legitimately. No one can do that. No one can guarantee you an 800 rating. No one can promise that. They don't know your information, they don't know your specifics, they don't know your debts, and they guarantee that. It doesn't work that way. The credit reporting agencies, if the negative marks on your record are supposed to be there, if you really have missed those payments and they're completely accurate, they're staying on there for the requisite amount of time. Just because you challenge it doesn't immediately take them off and have them stay off. There's no way they can know that if everything stays on, if you have legitimately poor credit and there's no mistakes, they can magically raise you to an 800 overnight. Doesn't work that way. Credit doesn't work that way. So every time you see an overpromise, that's a sure sign there's a problem. Another real concern is when they they demand upfront fees. FTC rule from many, many years ago, for these services, things like debt relief, debt settlement, they are not permitted to charge you upfront fees before they've actually done their jobs and done the work for you. So if they're ever asking you for an upfront fee before they've done anything for you, that's completely impermissible. That is a scam. That is a company that is unscrupulous. Do not work with that company. So there were a lot of signs like that. If they pressure you, high pressure sales tactics, they contacted you out of the blue and you said, I need time to think about this. I want to research your company. Well, if it's an unscrupulous company, they don't want you to take the time to research them. So they're going to pressure you. Sign up now. This is a one-time offer. We're not going to talk to you tomorrow. That's another sure sign that this is a potential scam. So these are ways to really avoid. And by the way, there could be unscrupulous companies who maybe it's not a complete scam, but they bypass certain rules and regulations, and they're really complete scams, where all they want is your credit card information, your debit card information, your banking information, and you will never hear from them again. Complete and total scam companies. There's that group as well. And I should mention, there are, within this area, there are some legitimate companies that ethically treat their consumers, obviously. But unfortunately, it's also fraught with a large percentage of companies that do skirt the rules and regulations and don't treat you ethically. So.
And I think it's really important that you mentioned that even if the company isn't a scam, maybe they just aren't the best company to interact with if they are, taking these practices or, using these tactics to get you to work with their business. So I think that is just as important as looking out for scams as well. Now, BBB accredited businesses have agreed to adhere to the BBB standards for trust. And these are probably the businesses that are a little bit more trustworthy and that you'd want to work with. Can you just tell us, what are some of the BBB standards for trust?
You know, among the many standards, and I won't tell you about every aspect. We'll be here for several hours. I like talking about that. But the goal is trustworthy businesses. The word's built into it. You're looking for businesses that are transparent, that are open with their consumers. So if they advertise a price, that's the real price. There's no hidden fees. Whatever fees there are, you must disclose those up front. You must deal with your customers honestly, ethically. If you have contracts, abide by those contracts. You know, if you have promises or warranties, abide by those warranties. You know, every aspect of the sale for the product or service has to be transparent and open and conveyed to the consumer. No surprises. You can't have misleading advertising promising, you know, bait and switch, one price and there's another price. And when you're dealing with your consumers, if there's a problem, be available. Have easy contact information. They need to know where you are, how to deal with those problems, and then address your consumers promptly and address all their issues in good faith. You may not agree with them, but at least give them a place to complain. And if there is a refund due, provide that promised refund if that's the case. Convey all your policies. If you have a 7-day return policy, that can't be conveyed after the fact. It has to be up front. If it's no returns, tell them up front. You can't tell them after the fact. You want to safeguard their information. So if you have to have a privacy and a security policy, and tell people, are you monetizing their information and selling it to third parties? So hold on to that information and make sure that they know what you're doing with it. I would also say, if you're in an industry that requires licensure, we want to make sure that you're maintaining that licensure currently in any area that you're operating. If you're operating in New York City and Westchester and Long Island, and you need licenses for all three, make sure you have all those licenses in all those areas. So make sure you have your competency licenses. You know, overall, embodying integrity. You want to make sure that you're transparent, you treat your customers fairly, no surprises. There's a lot more information I can give you about that, but those are kind of the key areas that we look for.
Now, what are some red flags people should look out for when seeking credit repair or debt relief services to ensure that they are not being scammed or just going to run into something that's going to cause even more stress?
You know, you want to make sure that they're taking the time to get to know who you are as a consumer. So you want to make sure that they're extensively interviewing you, that you're telling them your entire situation. They want to make sure that they're telling you all your rights as a consumer. If they don't do that, then you have to wonder, why do they really want to work with me if they don't want to tell me what my rights are? So when you're checking out a company, and I would also, by the way, do a full background check on them. You can check them out with bbb.org. That's bbb.org, not what I said. And make sure that if there's any concerns that we've reported, that you're noting those. Just do a full background search on the company. Never give them your information up front until you're sure you know who you're dealing with, obviously. Make sure they're not charging you upfront fees. Ask for a schedule. What they often do is they stack fees. So even if they're not charging you the upfront fee, which you're not allowed to do, they could ask you to put money into like an escrow-like account that could be used for a settlement, if that's the case. But in maintaining that account, they could add on fees to that account. So you want to make sure you know all the fees, if there's any hidden fees. Some of the unscrupulous companies, they hit consumers with so many stacked fees that you end up paying almost more than that than is being paid to your creditors. So think about that. You paid what you think is $10,000 to your creditors. Maybe $8,000 of that could be fees that you paid to the company. So you're treading water there. In fact, you could be underwater at that point. So make sure that you have a full schedule on the timeline. What products and services are they offering? What's the timeline for resolving my issue? How are they going to do it? You know, who are they working with? You know, you have to have a full contract that explains exactly what they're going to be providing for you, and they have to take the time to go through that contract, explain what each of the sections mean. And if they don't, if they say, listen, don't worry, just go ahead and sign here, that's a real red flag to walk away. They should want their consumers to understand what they're signing, what services there are, how do I cancel it if I'm not comfortable with this process. But it has to be an open and transparent process with the consumer. All the fees must be disclosed up front. There can't be surprise fees at that point. Make sure that they're not billing you again up front before the services are done, before settlements have been achieved. And then again, make sure they're not over-promising things that they really aren't allowed to promise you, things that they could never know will be done until they've actually done the work. You say, well, we can get all your creditors to agree with us. No. Once you've done the work and you have three areas of default, and those 3 creditors have agreed to do that, and they've started a payment plan, great. You've done the work, I made my first payment, then you go to the next step, which is paying their fee that's due, but only then.
Now that leads to my next question, which is so important. And the BBB website says people should refrain from services that offer a debt relief plan without education. And you said that, you know, whoever you're working with is going to want you to understand what's going on. So how does your company educate clients on maintaining financial health and avoiding potential credit relief or debt repair scams in the future?
I think any good service is going to give you, and again, I'm not talking about us, but any business in this industry is going to want to accompany this with consumer education. If you've gotten yourself into this position beforehand, what's going to stop you from falling right back into those issues after the fact? So it's educating consumers on building a budget, on maintaining that budget, on, you know, not overspending, you know, financial responsibility for the future, for the current and for the future. And if you don't combine that, you're going to have someone fall back into the same practices and the same problems and managing 20 different credit cards and maxing them all out. So it has to involve consumer education. And the more legitimate companies are going to combine that with consumer education. So they're getting you out of the problems you have now or helping you with those. And it's also helping you for the future. So we provide, I think, a great deal of information on, you know, what to do, what not to do, you know, things to avoid, but we're just one resource. The FTC provides great information. You can contact the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. There are a lot of nonprofits out there that provide free services to consumers. So, you know, we'll be a conduit. If we can help to provide you with additional resources and, you know, steer you to other organizations and other groups and government agencies that may help you, we're happy to do that as well. But the bottom line is that unless you combine consumer education and changing the way you go about your business, you're going to fall right back into the same traps. So if you've been in credit distress for 20 years and you spent 2 years getting out of that, what's to stop you from falling back into the same patterns that have happened? So it's got to be involved in consumer education as well.
And I definitely think that's so important, and I definitely wanted to highlight that because financial literacy is so important. And I think, yeah, any organization that is claiming to help you without getting to the root of maybe the problem isn't the organization that you want to work with.
It's a Band-Aid.
Right.
It's not getting to the root of the problem. You're exactly right.
Exactly. So yeah. I want to thank you so much for joining us and really educating our community about this and kind of telling them what resources they can use to kind of help this situation. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
If you would like to learn more about the various scams that are out there and the steps you can take to help protect yourself, please go to the Better Business Bureau website at www.bbb.org. Once again, we'd like to give Brian a very special thank you for educating our community. We have to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Open after this.
Happy anniversary to BronxNet, 30 years. Wow, brings back so many memories. This exact studio that I'm in right now, I broadcast out of here. This must have been around 2003. I mean, time flies by so quickly. I started out here, it was either Mr. Gary Axelbank and Mr. Batch. With Lady Morsar, we used to do a show here called In the Neighborhood. And I brought so many different guests on this show. To be able to bring your voice to the community is very powerful. To bring hip hop and spirituality, I brought my pastor in this same studio, Pastor Gino Jennings, and I'm sure you guys know who Pastor Gino Jennings is. That's rough. And some disciplined teaching. BronxNet is something that we need to uplift our communities because this is a platform that we can come, and if you have a vision that's in your mind going into your heart, you can use it to do uplifting things for your community.
Welcome back. Playwright Nelson Diaz-Marcano invites viewers on a journey to 1950s Puerto Rico with their play Las Borinqueñas. The play chronicles the lives of 5 Puerto Rican women who are fighting for their right to live full lives in a society that enforces strict gender roles. The Playwright of Las Borinqueñas joins me to discuss. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is such a pleasure.
Now, I love saying this word just because it's a new word for me, and it's a lot of fun to say. But can you just tell us, what is Las Borinqueñas?
As a word or what it means in general?
Well,
for
yeah,
me?
can you actually explain, like what it means?
I mean, the actual definition of it is like the island of Puerto Rico. Original name is Borinquen. So Borinqueñas are the women that come from that island that I come from. And this play, Las Borinqueñas, is a testament to those women and their resilience. It's a love letter to the women that raised me, and ultimately it's an exposure of American history. So that's what it means for me. That word is bringing it back to who we are, because those are the women that really raised us. It's not the American women. I wouldn't even say Puerto Rican women, but their original name is Las Borinqueñas to me.
Now, how did your journey with the play begin?
I am obsessed with exposing my culture. I grew up in a very assimilated Puerto Rico in the 90s, where people like me with curly hair were trying to look like Sean Hunter for Boy Meets World. I ended up looking like I had crazy two things coming up, and we were so obsessed with whiteness and looking American and looking at that time Baywatch and all those things that we forgot a lot of who we were. Not in like we never forget who we are. Nobody's gonna make us forget that. But in Kenya, will never let us forget. But I realized as I moved in here, and I had my ex-girlfriend at the time. She was having these deep pains. And she was trying to find a birth control pill that will help her deal with those pains at the same time that will help her. She didn't get the pill to not have kids. She had the pill because of the pains. But it took a year and different pills to finally get there. And that got me so interested, because I was raised only by women. So I remember, there was a shame to the birth control pill even in the 90s. So when I finally saw it, it was amazing to me that it was causing this much pain. And lo and behold, I checked the history of it, because I love researching. And there it goes. It's in Puerto Rico that they were building, that they were trying this. And that got me into a rabbit hole where I found the history of sterilization in Puerto Rico, the history of these birth control pills, and what they did to the women, to my ancestors, to get this pill ready for everybody else.
Now, I definitely want to highlight it. As I mentioned, the play takes place in 1950s, and there's a lot of significance and history regarding reproductive rights, and as you mentioned, birth control. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, one of the main things about 1950s for me is it's the moment that, to put it in context, in explain a little bit, the 1950s was a science race. People were doing the polio vaccine. There were, the space race was starting. There were so many things. The nuclear bomb had just come through. So there were all these science leaps that were happening that not till the 90s with the technology leap of the internet happened before. So the 50s in science has that. And then Puerto Rico, during that time, was the moment that the fighting against trying to be independent didn't end, but we got squashed, basically. And the United States made us a Commonwealth. So there was this aggressive takeover of our culture that, even though it has been happening for 50 years, now they had the permission of the Commonwealth world to make it more American. So this is, while the world was moving forward, Puerto Rico was getting into this place where it needed to move forward with it. But what that meant was you need to forget who you were. And so I wanted to highlight this, because one of the main things about my work is exploring the relationship between Puerto Rico and the United States, because it's American history. If Americans want us to, as a colony, they have to admit us as a American history. So this is American history, and that's why I chose the 50s, because it is such an important part of American history and Puerto Rican history, where they converge and become one, that has got us to this point. So if I'm going to explore that relationship, I think this point right here is the point where we can start. There's 50 years before that, but in this moment is the moment that everything that's happened begins.
Now, La Borinqueñas follows 5 women You know, how does the play explore the multifaceted nature of women in Puerto Rico through these characters?
These are all women, not that I knew directly, but that were part of my life. You know, like I said before, I grew up raised by women. My dad was around, but it wasn't like I lived with my grandmother, my mother, and my sister. All my life, I used to visit my other grandmother all the time. Like I very rarely have a male figure. So these women are just little parts of them. It's parts of my mother who had arthritis since I was born and woke up every day, got me to school, got me an education that many people like me didn't get. I come from the country. I come from very deep country where I had to go and catch chickens and eggs to eat. If I wanted breakfast, I had to go get my own eggs, so from the nest. So these women woke up every morning with pains, with a country that really set to get these gender roles, and they didn't care. They raised their community, they made us who we are, and like there's a reason Puerto Ricans still keep their identity is because of these women and who they were. And one of the things that I really want to explore here is that every time somebody does a tragedy play or like explores a tragic event, they focus so much about the effects that they have that they forget there was life happening. You know, when I remember when 9/11 happened, it was such a tragedy, but I also remember what was happening in my life. And there were other things that keep us resilient, that keep us moving forward. So I wanted to explore what is it that makes us Puerto Ricans, this little island in the middle of nowhere with 135 big, have people like Bad Bunny and like superstars that have changed mainstream media and pop culture and keep making history even though our culture keeps being attacked and basically trying to be diminished. And one of those things for me has always been these women that refuse to set themselves as a stereotype, these women that laugh out loud when bad things happen because that's the thing they need to do to move the next day. Because pain is not an option to thrive, and we don't survive, we thrive.
Now, I really want to talk about how the play explores pretty much the beginning of the birth control pill as a reproductive right and freedom, while also many other, as you mentioned, like sterilization happened in Puerto Rico. You know, can you just talk about the challenges of highlighting, you know, this polarizing reality for Canadian women where, of course, there's this new freedom, but how some of the women may have been negatively affected, you know, due to the experiments during that time?
Yeah, absolutely. This is actually a great question because it is a very divisive thing. Even myself, you know, these pills were created on the back of black and brown bodies. And black and brown bodies that once the trials were done, they were not able to afford anymore. So you have these women going to this trial to then be like, you can't afford it, and we're not going to give you a discount or anything. But at the same time, what was created through it, it is a miracle. This pill did create freedom. This pill did create choices for women that they never had before. It's probably, if not the most important discovery of the past century. And to think about that, and then to think about my grandparents and my friends of my grandparents being affected by it so badly. You know, it's not all of them. Obviously, there were so many people that didn't get affected, but there's also a high percentage of women that got sterilized. There's and not just by the sterilization operation, but by the pills. That a lot of women that like had such nausea, such headaches, such blood clots, such everything that they lost who they were during this process, and they didn't know why, because nobody told them why. They told them these pills were safe. They told them these pills were 100% safe. They had been tested, that this was a trial for family planning. But at the same time, once they found out, more women signed up. More women wanted to do it because it was so needed, especially in a world where overpopulation is a problem and poverty was rampant, and you know, with the embargoes that we have in Puerto Rico, which, you know, we have the same embargo that Cuba has. So we are paying more money in groceries sometimes than Americans pay for. These things, I lost my train of thought here.
It's okay, yeah. But I love that you're mentioning that it is kind of like, even listening to it now, I can see how conflicting it is for
I
so
think
many
that's
people.
it.
Yeah.
I got it back. The problem is that these women needed all this, and they got the opportunity to see how their life was going and how they could do it. So they were willing doing this sacrifice. But they thought about this to me is, of course they were doing. They were selected. They were targeted to do this because they knew they wouldn't be saying no. Dr. Pincus actually had tried this in the mainland a few times, and the women here, women of privilege, that were his patients or his colleague Dr. John Rock patients, didn't have to deal with it for long. And they were like, oh, I have a headache, I have edema. They have so many things, and they were like, no. But this woman didn't have a choice. Like, there's famously one woman, I was gonna highlight her, but I didn't have time, but there's this woman called Julia Garcia who had 10 kids by the time she was 30.
Oh, wow.
And she started at 16. So just thinking about all that, she didn't need to breathe in those times around. So she doesn't really know what the pain was from the pill or being pregnant all the time on her body. So it's that kind of place that was so easy to take advantage from. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's a miracle that we have this pill.
Right, and I definitely think that given the current climate of reproductive rights, that a play like this is just definitely something that's needed, and because it gives us a chance to kind of look back. I think a lot of us are stuck in today. It gives us a chance to look back. So I think it's so amazing. Can you just let people know what they can do to actually support the play?
Yeah, I mean, come see it, put it all on your social medias and all that, but more importantly is get educated. Go out there and get educated. The birth control dilemma is not over. As we can tell, there's a million things that are still happening. There's so many problems and so many issues that's been going on that the best support you can do to this play, besides watching it, is get educated for all those women in your life. Make sure that when they come to problems, you're not ignorant of those problems. And if you are ignorant of those problems, educate yourself so you can help as much as you can, because we are entering a part in America that is hard, especially for women, as Roe versus Wade and all these things are taken away. So the best we can do is be there, women, men, everybody, be there, educated, so we can fight this in a way that makes sense, because if it doesn't, they can easily steamroll us.
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us and having this conversation, and I really did appreciate kind of getting the history lesson, of like what's happening in Puerto Rico and affecting us right now. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
Las Borinqueñas will take the stage from April 3rd to the 28th. To learn more about the play and how to get tickets, visit latinxplaywrights.com. We've come to the end of our show today. I'd like to thank all of our guests for joining us and you, the viewers, for tuning in. If you missed any part of today's show, you can catch the recable cast at 5 and 10 p.m. on Optimum Channel 67 and Verizon Fios Channel 33, or watch anytime on the web at BronxNet.org. You can catch a brand new episode of Open with Darren Jaime on Wednesday and with Rena Valentine on Friday. I'm Kibin Alleyne, wishing you and yours safety and wellness now and always. See you next time.